So one of the things I think successful people don't talk about nearly enough is simply the fact that to get to where they are in life, they had to get extraordinarily lucky. And there's no getting around that. But there are things that you can do, obviously, that increase your likelihood of getting lucky. We've talked about this before. I call this the petri dish of serendipity. But there are other things that you simply can't affect. Blind luck, the fact that you were, born a human in the 20th or 21st century, depending on, how old you are, if you're listening to this. If you were born with your full, cognitive functioning, if you were born in America versus in a third world country, right? These are things that are outside of your control, and they definitely impact your likelihood of being successful in life. One of the things that I was reflecting on this weekend is I got extraordinarily lucky from the day I was born for a reason that only became really clear to me around the time I turned 30 years old. So it took me 30 years to fully appreciate this way that I had gotten extraordinarily lucky. And it was simply the fact that I have an incredible dad. An incredible dad. And I joked about this on Instagram. I said, if you want to be successful in life, like the best success hack I can give you is just to have an awesome dad or mom, right? Like an awesome parent. I didn't appreciate this fully when I was growing up. Parents are often, they're kind of the enemy as you're a teenager and you're going into your 20s. You're like, they don't know what they're doing. They're trying to hold me back. They don't understand and all this stuff. And they want what's best for you. And that's usually filtered through the lens of their own life and their own experiences. But the truth is, I got so lucky because my dad has given me so much good wisdom and advice over the years. And in this episode, I wanted to share with you 3 stories and 3 pieces of advice that my dad gave me at pivotal moments in my life that have served me incredibly well, both in my personal life, in my business life. And I think if you take these lessons, and maybe you don't have a dad that's quite awesome as mine, you could take this and apply it and get a lot of the benefits. So the first lesson is this. When I came out of high school, I was a terrible student. My ADHD, I can blame my ADHD all day long. But the truth is, I just had a terrible grade point average. The only reason I got accepted into any schools was because I'm a really good test taker and I did incredibly well on the SATs. So on one hand, terrible GPA, other hand, great test scores. So I had my choice of pretty much every middle of the pack school you could want. And I was wanting to go to school A because it appeared to me to be the most prestigious of all the schools that I had gotten into. I was like, that's the most prestigious one. My dad suggested to me, though, that I go to the cheapest school on the list. And I didn't want that because I, for whatever reason, attached status to this other school. And my dad made a very interesting point. And I did not listen to him, by the way. It would only be like a decade later that I'd look back and be like, I played that all wrong. I ended up going to the most prestigious of these schools, which in the grand scheme was still like nowhere on anybody's list of like top most elite colleges and ever, right? And so I went to this school that was elite by these measures, but was lame by every other measure. And so it gave me the perception of status, but nobody else cared about it. And his point was like, if you're not going to one of the top 5 schools in the country, if you're not going to Harvard or Yale or Stanford or whatever, if you're not going to one of those 5 schools, he's like, then it really doesn't matter where you go. From that point forward, nobody really cares. All you're showing up with is a piece of paper and the knowledge that you've acquired in that location, and that's about it. And he said, you can get that same education, you can get that same piece of paper from that school there, but you can get it for a fraction of the cost. I didn't listen. So instead of going to the school that would have cost me $5,000 a year, I went to the one that cost me $40,000 a year. This was back in the 2000s, mind you. So I went to a very expensive school that was like just as expensive as like going to a first-rate Ivy League school. But I didn't get the prestige. I didn't actually get the status associated with it. In my mind, I got it. But his point was this: you need to understand what's the goal that you're trying to work towards, right? And was going to this school A going to get me to my goal any better than this school over here, school Z? And the answer was no. I just couldn't see it at the time because it lacked any kind of status in my mind. And I couldn't stop playing that status game, even though by every measure I had already lost the status game. I was trying to win like this stupid prize that nobody even cared about. You went to a school that's not even in the top 1,000. So it's like, what are you doing here, Anthony? Right? So I wish I could have connected earlier, like to understand what's your goal in whatever it is that you're doing, not just in school, but whatever your goal is in life, and identifying what is the path that's actually going to get me there. And I didn't understand at the time. I was playing the status game when I needed to be playing different games entirely. That would take me a whole lot longer to figure out. Second lesson. So coming out of college, I was a hopeless romantic, and I fell in love quite easily. And this one woman, she broke my heart. This was a funny one, actually. She was very religious, and I was not religious. But I wanted the girl to like me, so I went and became religious. And I got a degree in religion, and I became a youth pastor. I worked at a Bible camp, all these things. Like all these things that like boys do to get girls to like them. She broke my heart, and I turned into a sorry sack for a hot minute, for a couple months. And my dad, he observes this, and he just looks at me one day. My dad is not like an overly emotional or soft and sensitive type of guy. He's a former Army Ranger. And he goes, you're just a sad sack. I can't be around this anymore. I'm going to pay for you to go to this, to Mount Hood out in Oregon to get a weekend of skiing and snowboarding. This is like in May, by the way. Like they have a glacier up there where you can go and ski year round, right? So he sends me off. He spends $1,000 to send me off on this thing. Totally understand. That sounds like, bougie first world problem. Oh, Anthony's dad sent him off to this snowboarding thing, right? Yes, I'm bougie, and I'm special, and I'm spoiled. I'm all those things. But the thing is here, what he taught me was a very valuable lesson here, which was I had been sitting around just wallowing and ruminating on this and trying to problem solve it, trying to figure out, why did she break my heart? Why didn't she like me? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just going round and round and around in circles, making no progress. And he's like, you need to get your mind off this. You need to go do something physical and disconnect from this. You need to go distract yourself. And I didn't know it at the time, but my dad might be a psychology genius, because psychological studies show that when people, whether they ruminate or whether they distract themselves in moments of grief or in trauma or crisis, they have very different outcomes. The people who distract tend to have better long-term outcomes than the people who ruminate. So my dad helped me tremendously there and gave me a valuable tip, which is when you're going through stressful moments in life, you cannot ruminate your way to a solution. Sometimes you just got to get away, get your mind completely clear, and then come back to it to try and solve it later on. All right, the third story. This one was more recent, actually. I was probably like, 31, 32 years old. So I had started down my entrepreneurial journey, and I was having success, but I had just stepped into helping one of my friends turn one of his business around, and it was failing. It was not doing very well. And I was really struggling with the blow to my self-confidence. And I remember talking to my dad, and he said something really interesting, which was, Anthony, in this game that you're playing, it's all but inevitable at some point in your life, you're probably going to have to file for bankruptcy. He's like, there's going to be some point probably where you lose it all. And he said it so matter of fact, and just like it was this foregone conclusion. But it was what he said after that like had the most profound effect. He said, there's going to come a point probably where you'll file bankruptcy and you'll lose everything and you'll have to start all over. And he looks at me and he goes, but you're going to get it all back, because like you are that person. Like you built it the first time, you're going to lose it. You're going to learn valuable lessons, and then you're going to get it back. And there was something about his belief, not like this blind optimism of like, oh, I think my son can figure it all out and he's perfect and never going to fail. He acknowledged, he's like, you're going to probably fail, and it's going to be epic at some point. And it's like, and that's okay. And that was such a relief for me to realize that I didn't have to hide stuff from my dad. I didn't have to posture or present, and I could just be myself, like the warts and the positives and whatever. And he would just, he would accept it as it was. And I share that story because as you're on your entrepreneurial journey, you probably will fail pretty hard at some point. And I have complete confidence that despite that failure, if you keep going, you can rebuild, you can make something of that. And that's just another milestone on your journey, but that's not the end destination. And so I hope you can take these 3 stories, these 3 ideas from my dad, apply them to your own life, and go forth and crush. I will see you in the next episode, my friend.